Hi, Terrence.
Hey Tiffany, how are you?
I'm doing well, thank you. So I'm so glad to have you here today. Welcome, everyone, to MODA's next installment of Design Equals Change, where Atlanta's most creative people and some from beyond the city invite you virtually. Sorry. And sometimes in their home studio or maker space, where they'll talk about their work, their creative career trajectory, and what they're thinking about now as our world takes new form. During this session, we're in conversation with Terence Lester, a minister, speaker, community activist, author, and founder of Love Beyond Walls, a not-for-profit organization focused on poverty awareness and community mobilization, using that vehicle as a way of mobilizing people to take part in those stories. His campaigns, such as Love Sinks In, have been featured on USA Today, Black Enterprise, Essence, and Reader's Digest, including being viewed globally on the Today Show, Good Morning America, and also The Bright Side with Katie Couric, just to name a few. Also, Terence's publications include When We Stand, I See You, Getting Past Stuck, Simple Prayers for Hurting People, and Identity Theft. Currently, the Museum of Design Atlanta is featuring survival architecture and the art of resilience, where we're celebrating and exploring how designers all over the world are transforming lives and making the world a better place by using empathy to rethink ways shelter can be responsive during times of crisis and extreme natural disasters. Terence's work is deeply rooted in that, and today we'll be talking about how he formalized the concept of Love Beyond Walls by incorporating it as a nonprofit and living as a homeless person in this heart of the city of Atlanta. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Terence Lester. Thank you. Thank you for joining us today. Happy to have you here.
Thank you, Tiffany. I'm really excited about being here with MODA and all of you wonderful people who are here presently and who will watch this at a later date. Thank you so much for having me. If I can, I would love to share my presentation and just talk through a little bit about how Love Beyond Walls started, um, some of the things that I've learned as a servant leader here in the city of Atlanta and in our country, but also some of the creative projects that we have initiated to affirm the inherent worth and value of our neighbors without an address. So I'll share my screen here. Around 8 years ago this month, my family was dropping me off underneath this bridge in the heart of the city. Currently, this bridge has hostile architecture in the form of boulders there, and the tents have been replaced with rocks. But I remember this day vividly because there was a wind chill that was pushing the weather into single digits. And the only thing that I possessed at that time was a backpack, something to, uh, socks. I had a pair of gloves and I had my cell phone for safety. But as I was underneath this bridge, many people that I was telling via social media that I was going to do this kind of demonstration met me with a lot of criticisms because I was doing this around Christmas time. In my mind, my wife and I wanted to show our kids that it was better to be present and to be a gift than to receive one, which is a part of like the core value and the social framing that we are taking our kids through. And if you can advance to the next slide, um, when I arrived there, instead of being met with opposition, I was embraced. This tent behind me was a tent that many community members actually rallied together to get me. I remember um, sharing meals with some of my friends underneath the bridge. I remember standing around a campfire, only there was no firewood, and watching some of my friends actually throw donated clothes into a fire to stay warm. I remember one particular evening um, uh, where my feet had got really cold, and my toes were starting to feel like popsicles. And I had no change of clothes. I had nothing. And I walked over to my friend Tony and I was asking him, how do you keep your feet warm? And he walks into his tent without saying anything to me. And he literally comes back over and he hands me his last pair of donated socks. And I remember in that moment how going through this experience started to change me, because the social framing of the issue of homelessness is that uh, if you are without an address, then you, one, have some type of mental health issue, or two, you are addicted to drugs. And this social framing has also been criminalized. And what it does is it places the experiences of many different people who have come into the issue of homelessness in one large bucket, right? And what I've learned through going through this experience is that homelessness itself is not monolithic. There are many different segues into the experience of homelessness. And so this social framing has also kind of created the social behavior in how we treat our neighbors without an address. And if you can go to the next slide, I started to really understand that distance literally creates a lack of empathy. That when you are not proximate to a people group, whatever it is, whatever people group it is, if you're not proximate to people who have living stories that have emerged from their own social locations, then it's easier for biases to be socially constructed, or it's easier for you to adopt information about a group of people that you've never met. And so when we first started Love Beyond Walls, we actually started it underneath this bridge with this campaign. And I literally launched the organization from the palm of my hand on my cell phone. If you go to the next slide, um, you know, we were kind of like in the beginning trying to understand, how do we create more belonging? How do we create access for people who haven't felt socially included to feel as though they are a part of the whole community? Um, we operated from this notion that distance itself not only creates a lack of empathy, but distance itself creates inequity and this lack of belonging. Um, I can't tell you the number of times that we've been in conversations with people um, who will tell you how being unseen and being treated as though they are invisible really shapes the way that not only they see themselves, but how they see themselves as being a part of the whole community. And I knew as an organization, one of the things that we had to do early on is figure out a way where we could pass the microphone. Um, there are a lot of organizations that talk about being a voice for the voiceless. Well, I had this understanding by doing this demonstrative project that everyone has a voice. Um, I can tell you a number of stories of individuals who arrived in the plight of homelessness from different segues. Like, everybody's journey is unique. But the thing about being voiceless is that, people have voices. Some voices are heard while others are actually silenced. And so, like, the next slide, I had a clip that I wanted to play you, but if you could go to the slide after that. um, we started to understand that we needed to be committed to a work to make those persons who are deemed invisible or unseen visible. And we wanted to do that in a number of ways. Firstly, we had to uh, think of a way how we could create community to bring communities together from totally opposite ends of the spectrum. How do you bring together people who have housing, right, or shelter, with people who don't have any shelter, when the gap is the social framing of those without an address, creates this sort of lens where people are seen as criminal or threats to society. And so we started building a community, uh, and making it, uh, tearing down the walls of distance between people with an address versus folks without an address. If you can go to the next slide. One of the things that I learned while starting this project is that there was a lack of education and understanding about the complexities of what it means to be without an address. Most people tend to lean towards, second and third hand information, never really actually sitting down or sharing a meal or being proximate to our neighbors without an address. And what we started to find out early on is that through conversation, it reoriented and changed the perception of how people without an address was seen. And so we started bringing communities together, and then I started to find out that people still held closely to their biases and would oftentimes mistreat people experiencing homelessness and not even have any conscious about the ways in which they were mistreating them based upon their ignorance. So I'll never forget, we had a project going on at our center, which is in College Park. And this lady she had worked all night to bring meals to our community, to share meals. And it was this guy who literally just like denied or like rejected a sandwich that she was trying to give. Well, she was trying to pass out a ham sandwich. And this lady just goes off, right? You should be grateful. You should be respectful. You should be appreciative for whatever you can receive. I mean, she was just totally disrespecting uh, this brother. And I saw the thing unfolding. And so I walked over to the brother and I asked him, what was going on. And he says, well, this lady is trying to give me something, but I live on the streets and I have a hard time getting access to medication, and I can't eat this because it would be detrimental to my health. And I shared this with this individual who had come to be a part of the community, and literally she broke down and she was like I just didn't know. And then I started running into these different instances where I would see people mistreat people experiencing homelessness based upon this lack of education. And so I wanted to do something about it. I wanted to create a space where we could share the oral history and the stories of people who are going through this struggle in a way that was affirming to their inherent worth and value, but also doing it in a way where it could be educational and life transforming for the persons who pause their lives long enough to hear the other side of the issue of homelessness. And so one day I was riding down the street, you can go to the next slide, and I seen a shipping container. And I was like, thinking of a way I could literally retrofit the shipping container to see how we could turn it into a museum, because there's a lot of parallels with shipping containers and the experience of homelessness. Every shipping container moves around from place to place. It has a story of origin and it carries things of worth and value. And it's the same thing with the experience of homelessness. Every person is transient, have a story of origin, but that doesn't mean that they don't have worth and value on the inside. And so I'll never forget trying to figure out a way I could communicate the need for this. And I started doing research and found out there was no museums in the United States of America that actually represented the subject of homelessness. I mean, you got museums about pots and plants and dogs and keychains and bikes and all sorts of things, but wasn't a museum representing the population of people that are oftentimes invisible. And so, if you go to the next slide, so I normally when I come up with ideas, I take them through an ideation process. You can go to the next slide. My ideation process looks a little like first asking a question or asking questions like, what is around us that can be repurposed? Because oftentimes I think when we think of these grand ideas, we want to construct something new, not realizing that there's excess already around us that we can reimagine its usefulness in a way that could become something that can be transformative. And so shipping containers are everywhere. There's shipping container yards, literally, where shipping containers will be discarded as trash or used as scrap metal. And I wanted to be really economical, but also think of a way that could have a powerful message. If you go to the next slide, I started thinking through my personal process, which is listening, asking, exploring, feedback, and then lunch. Um, it's a little different from the design thinking process in that in design thinking, the first stage is empathize, right? But when you go through the empathy stage of the design thinking process, it normally denotes a people group that hasn't been proximate for an extended amount of time. It's like, let's go out here and be around a group of people for, a few moments and then come back and talk about the data. My listening phase embodies that I'm already infused in the community. I already know the people in the community. I already know their hopes, their dreams, their aspirations, some of the things that are um, uh, creating fear in them, some of the things that are have been like life altering. And so I then go through to this asking phase, like asking people who are already in the context or already in the plight what they would like to see. And I know in the design thinking process is more defined in its definition, but those who are defining also maintain the power. And in my asking phase, I am trying to empower those that need to be heard, right? And I'm trying to empower those who are not often invited to the table. My next phase is the exploring phase, and so in my exploration, I am thinking about how can we reimagine something that is easily accessible, but also I'm exploring who I need to bring to the table. A lot of the projects that we have done haven't been just experts. There's been a combination of those who have the skill sets, but also those who are in the community, where there's this synergy that's happening between like a vision, an idea, those in the community who have been through the plight or currently overcoming the plight or experiencing the plight, and those who are lending their expertise or their talents to actually come up with a design. And so after we produce a design, then we get feedback and then we actually launch. If you can go to the next slide. But I remember going through the process of searching, and I remember being inside of this shipping container. If you can go to the next slide. I remember the phase where we actually had some engineer actually develop a blueprint and finding people who had already been in close proximity to our community, finding unique ways that they could offer up their skills and expertise, because oftentimes we tend to think that when we're trying to solve an issue that we need to develop new skills as opposed to using our already existing skills to lend to a project for social impact. If you can go to the next slide. I remember talking about the vision of how this could be a museum that actually traveled from place to place. Um, and this particular image is, we took it to a conference. It was a national conference, and we had people from all walks of life actually pausing to go through this museum before they actually went in. And it was unique that people would actually come into this museum and learn about the experience of homelessness, because there was a lot of people outside of the conference without an address. And then as they went through the museum, we could start to see the shift in how people would not just readily walk by and like socialize with people who were a part of this community that's normally invisible. If you could go to the next slide. We also have stations set up in the museum where people can go through the process of thinking about what they would actually write on a sign if they were begging for change, which puts a person in a place to feel what it's like to be vulnerable. We had a group travel from South Carolina yesterday from a library because they're thinking about recreating this in Columbus, South Carolina. And they went through this process, and one of the participants said she felt very helpless going through the process. So really trying to get people to understand the other side of what it really means to go through these types of processes of creating a sign to beg someone for help to get medication, right? It's not just some random person wanting to put their life on display, but it's something that you go through internally to have the courage to ask for help, even when people deny you of that help. If you can go to the next slide. So we retrofitted the museum. This is a tour. It's a guided tour. We developed an application where we pass out cell phones and people can go through like their own tour, listening to the oral stories or watching videos of those who are educating you about the realities of what it means to experience homelessness. You can go to the next slide. When we have full displays, this is actually a tiny home back when the tiny home era was much more just like small pieces of wood. There are people who actually live in this space that we have walked with out of the plight of homelessness, where when you go up to it, you get a chance to like poke your head in, and there are people telling you their own journeys of, how hard it was for them to overcome. If you can go to the next slide, we have virtual reality in there where people can, have someone walk up to them or talk to them about what it means to be in the cold weather. If you can go to the next slide. We've seen social impact where law enforcement officers have used this for training to build empathy. This has been used by universities as well as other museums. If you can go to the next slide. It was featured at the Center for Civil and Human Rights, where we had thousands of guests participate and go through outside of the guests that come to us normally. If you can go to the next slide. And, I always tell people that just because a person does not have an address does not mean that they are not your neighbor or our neighbor, which is a powerful statement. And thinking about, Martin Luther King's language around "we live in a world house." If you can go to the next slide. And so in closing, last year we launched a campaign called Love Sinks In, giving people experiencing homelessness accessibility to hand washing during COVID-19. People normally ask me, how did I come up with the idea? Well, the idea emerged from being in community and listening to a guy named Dimitri, who said that he feared he would lose his life if he didn't wash his hands. And so our organization has also retrofitted RV units, such as the one on the right, and have used RV units. And there are a lot of portable features on the RVs, like porta potties, portable cooking stations, and portable hand washing stations. And so we had the idea to repurpose the hand washing station to be deployed to give access to people experiencing homelessness the ability to wash their hands to protect themselves against the spread and contraction of COVID-19. And so the next slide will show you, we reached out to RV parts, and I found this place that would work with us. And so we launched with a few hand washing stations that are portable, that we set up underneath bridges, behind buildings, in unique spaces. And so we started with 15 in Atlanta, and now we have hand washing stations in 72 cities around the country, as well as um, 2 additional countries. This particular image right here is actually in Colorado. In Colorado, it's illegal to sleep in your car if you're experiencing homelessness, and we partnered with a community there that literally has to rent parking lots to give people experiencing homelessness living out their car the ability to park safely and sleep in their car, because they don't have anywhere to sleep. And so we furnished all of their parking lots with hand washing stations, because sanitation should be a human right, but it's an issue that hasn't really been considered outside of COVID. And so we're hoping to continue to give accessibility of this basic essential resource to our neighbors without an address. And you can go to the next slide. And we've seen this all across the country, in Texas, Chicago, New York, I mean, California. We have hand washing stations all around the United States, giving people that direct access to be able to keep themselves clean as well. And so that concludes my talk. I tried to get it all in as much as I could, given our technical difficulties. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Terrence. This is really a great comprehensive view of everything that you do with the organization. And we're really excited about the future for Love Beyond Walls. Right now, we have a couple questions pulled for you. I guess I'll just start by asking, I know when I visited the Dignity Museum, I was learning about love being a core component of the organization, and how would you describe love being a founding pillar behind each project?
Yeah, we just lost a scholar and brilliant writer in the person of Bell Hooks uh, just yesterday, and a lot of her writings centered this idea of love. She says, kind of like, if you are fighting for justice and equity and whatever you're fighting for, we cannot forget love, because love is the thing that binds us together. And love is also the thing that is the force that is transformative. When I think about love, I think about this 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 space that is able to hold the weight and the complexities of what we see in the world, without judgment, without bias. It's it's the thing that fully accepts and receives people. It's the thing that includes people. It's the thing that has the power to transform the issues that we see in the world when people come together in community and take a stand against the ills that plague vulnerable communities.
Right. Absolutely. When you're visiting Love Beyond Walls or volunteering with Love Sinks In, how, how do you envision the intersection of visiting or taking part in your activations, um, intersecting with institutional policy change at a local and national level? What would you think would be the natural next step for that?
Yeah, it's a great question. I, so Deborah Stone in her book Policy Paradox literally talks about how policy itself is telling us a story, whether we see it or not. Every policy has a narrative underlying narrative. There is a villain and a hero. There's a problem and a solution, and I think oftentimes those persons who are writing policy um, have never been proximate to the communities in which the policy may affect. And oftentimes that distance in itself can create a lack of empathy. I see our work as being the the empathy motivator, if you will, or the thing that sparks empathy that causes persons who are writing policy to consider those who their policy might affect. Our campaigns are also highly educational in that it creates the understanding that is often lacked because of that distance, and it has the power to bring people together from all walks of life. And so we've seen legislators go through our museum and wrestle with questions. We've seen council members wrestle with questions. And so we're hoping that our work not only informs and directs, but also creates the type of thought process needed to embody empathy in policy.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great. Um, when I'm thinking about during your presentation, you were talking about the Dignity Museum traveling and what that looks like as a traveling museum. How do you envision that being packaged, both Love Sing Sing and Dignity Museum, to go across the country, to go across the globe? How does that travel, and what does that concept look like from ideation to completion? Give us a little inside view.
Yeah, I mean, COVID has changed the dynamics of a lot of things, the way people engage, the way people learn, right? The way people perceive reality. I mean, we're talking about a metaverse, right now, in terms of technology. And so I am thinking about storytelling, but also how we communicate these stories, leveraging the power of technology, leveraging the power of um, some tools where people can go through empathy training, where they can experience the museum where they are without us having to travel. Of course, we will travel certain places if they will have us, but we're also thinking about how do we leverage the power of technology where people can have that experience right from the palm of their hand, right?
Right.
Um, so those are options that we are thinking about, but we're always open for people to invite us out. There have been several different cities around the country that we're thinking about traveling to, but also we're thinking about how do we package our message in a way where people can have that experience tangibly wherever they are.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that you bring up the metaverse. There's so much happening with that, and also through Oculus and creating programming that people can just download to their devices from home, or whether they're doing it through an institution. So that's a great point that you brought up. As it relates to funding and keeping your organization growing and expanding, is there a certain type of supporter that you're targeting, or organizations that you look to partner with in the future? And what does that look like for Love Beyond Walls?
Yeah, um, I think funding itself is changing, and so my honest answer is, as a leader who is in the throes of the last 24 months, I am, researching and trying to figure out the best way forward to keep those donors engaged, but also create opportunities where they can be proximate. Um, Museums within itself is changing, and organizations are changing, and so like I am in the midst of it right now, trying to figure that out. And I
Mhm.
say that because there may be someone listening to this who thinks that they have to have a clear answer. um, I don't think there are any clear answers. We've just been trying to maintain the relationships that we've already established with corporate sponsors. People have given us grant, but also growing our individual and monthly giving base and connecting uh, the real impact of people's contributions to our work.
Mhm.
I think people need to see that real time, and they also need to have space where they can come and physically and tangibly see that as well. So we're just staying in the vein of what we've been doing, but also researching new ways.
How can we follow and support your work with Love Beyond Walls?
Yeah, for sure. If you want to follow us on social media, it's at Love Beyond Walls. That's Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. If you want to look us up, that's lovebeyondwalls.org. If you want to visit the museum, you can also go to our site and click the volunteer page, which you can sign up to tour. You've been there, Tiffany.
I
I'm not.
have.
Do
I
you want
highly
to say
recommend.
anything about what you experienced before we close?
Yeah, absolutely. I would just say, it's an eye-opening experience. It's maybe not even what you expect, how immersive it is, and just to hear and close your eyes and visualize and put yourself in their shoes. I think a big core component of the process is listening, like you said, and activating that connection to the community, and not looking at it at a distance view is really important. And that creating empathy process that you talk about, and it's a lot different from design thinking. So I'm glad that you brought that up. The docent is great that you have for your tours, just walking you through and not being intimidated by all the information and just absorbing it, and canceling out preconceived notions of what you think homelessness might be, or who the personas are, they're actual people. And when you can connect on that level, it really forever changes you. So I recommend people getting out, walking through the museum, doing the hands-on practices of putting yourself in that situation really changes you, and your outlook. So I look forward to doing more and connecting on a human
Yeah,
level, with that community. So I recommend it, highly recommend the Dignity Museum, and supporting in any way that you can. Yeah.
yeah, and we're looking to grow the museum even more. So this is just the start.
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, we definitely want to thank you and Kayla for speaking on behalf of Love Beyond Walls and all the work that you do on a local level and national level for advocating, for the houseless community. We're excited about what you'll do next, and we definitely want to thank all of our sponsors and supporters, for MODA and our current exhibition. If you want to find out more, you can visit museumofdesign.org and find out about this exhibition, Survival Architecture, and upcoming exhibitions as well, and how to become a member. Thank you. Happy holidays. Stay safe. And thank you to our team at MODA. Thank you, Kayla and Terrence. And this video recording will be made available tomorrow, so look out for that as well. Take care. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.